Hello everyone and welcome. I am working on an overdue project today. A few years ago I made a not historically accurate underbust corset and well, fresh out of the pattern PDF it had some issues. I made it work as best I could for a couple of years, but after wearing it on some truly horrendous hot days, it was really time to retire it and make a proper corset. I'm using the Black Snail Edwardian straight front corset for my new project. It's a simplified pattern as stated in the documentation with no gussets to insert, which is why I chose it over other more accurate patterns. To be completely honest, I don't really enjoy making corsets, and that's also why I dragged my feet about just starting this project. One thing I do really love about using print-at-home patterns, at least for me, is I have a wide format printer, so I can just toss this on that printer and be ready to go with no taping necessary. Who doesn't love that? Before I actually cut out my pattern pieces though, I'm going to tweak them just a little tiny bit. I am a big person, I can't deny that. But I'm going to have to do a little bit of altering to make this pattern fit me properly. So I'm going mainly by my waist measurement, which would put me securely in a size 28. My bust is larger and my hips are smaller. Because this is meant to be such a curvy and padded out style, I'm not worried about the corset being too large in the hips. I will just shove a bunch of padding underneath and I'll be fine. What I am worried about is that if I cut the 28 for all of the sizes, that it'll be too tight in the bust and it won't lay right, and I will end up getting a bit of a shelf rather than the soft, rounded. Yeah, let's be honest, this is kind of a droopy boob look. I don't want to go for full droop. Gravity is already doing its best to pull the girls down to my waist. I don't need my corset to make it to further encourage that. But what I'm going to do is on the side front and side seams, I'm going to just take a curve and flare up from the size 28 to the size 30, and that should give me enough extra space, even if it's only an inch or so, to have it fit a little better. So let's get to it. To size up my pattern, I am simply using a hip curve and I am drawing a connecting line between the smaller size and the larger size that I want. Just to ensure that there is a smooth transition. That's why I'm using a hip curve rather than freehanding it completely, and making sure it stays neat, and then tracing over each line with the Sharpie once I'm done drawing it and like the shape of it. Once I get all of my pattern pieces cut out, I'm going to for once make a mock-up. I've got some random pinkish twill, which, yeah, another one of my cats clearly napped on this at one point because it's definitely got cat fur on it. But I'm going to make a mock-up, and I don't know if I'll get to it tonight, but I want to at least try and get this cut out today. So the cutting process is a fairly straightforward one. I am just arranging all of the pieces on my twill and pinning them down and cutting them out. I am using a triangle, as you can see, to make sure that my pieces are square to the grain line, or the selvage I should say, because I could not find my wide ruler to do this. Normally I have one of those really big 6-inch wide plastic quilting rulers to do that, but it's missing at the moment. So I just used my measuring tape and the triangle square to make sure everything was on grain, and then yep, just pinned and cut, nice and easy. For pinning and later sewing this together, I opted to pin all of my pieces wrong sides together so that my seam allowances would be on the outside of the mock-up. This was partially because I was anticipating, not for the mock-up of course, that I would be flat felling the seams on the final corset, and normally the flat felling is a seam finish you do from the outside or from the right side, but also I stitched it this way because as you'll see in a little bit, when I put my boning in for the mock-up, it was much easier to have the seam allowances on the side I was not putting the boning on. Rather than using the actual pattern piece for the center back panels, I basically cannibalized an old corset, took out the center back panels from that, which already had the grommets and the boning in, and just top stitch them in, making sure to match the width of the back panel and the seam allowance of the side back so that it was still the correct width. Although the strips are a little short, they still did the job. Rather than sew a whole bunch of boning channels for my mock-up, what I did was I took boning and some painter's tape, which is the blue tape you see me using here, and I literally just taped the bones to the inside of my corset. This is great because the painter's tape won't leave any residue on either the fabric or the boning, and I can to some extent adjust the positioning before the tape is a little too worn out. And it's quick and fast and a great way to do it, and unfortunately I didn't come up with this, but I love using this technique. Alright, we're back now. I have tried this on. Unfortunately, while I was trying it on, I couldn't find my chemise, so I just wore a modern camisole, so I did not take any pictures or videos that I'm willing to share because it shows a little too much, let's say. So what happened? This turned out to be too big when I tried it on. Despite checking my measurements, when I put this on, I was able to lace it fully shut and I didn't get any waist reduction at all, which kind of defeats the purpose of having a corset. One of the purposes anyway. There are a couple other reasons why corsets are used. So after further consulting the measurement charts and getting opinions from a couple other people, what I decided to do is cut this down 2 sizes, because what I need is, I need at least the waist to be 4 inches smaller than it currently is. And if I go down 2 sizes, that'll actually give me, a 2-inch gap and a 2-inch reduction. Actually, I think it'll be a 5-inch difference altogether, 4.5 or 5. I don't have the measurement sheet close enough at hand to double check it, but going down 2 sizes will give me what I want for a waist size at least. And then from there, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to recut. I'm going to trim down my pattern, and then I'm going to just cut it out of this. I should be able to not have any issues cutting the smaller pieces out of these already, but I'm going to take it apart and then I'm going to recut it smaller. But first I have to untape all of my bones. Now, because the one thing I am slightly worried about is if I cut this down 4 inches all over, that the bust will be too small, because I am not I'm not going to make the adjustment of having the bust be one size larger as I cut this down. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut it straight down 2 sizes from the waist. So I'm going from a 28 to a 24 all over. And I figure once I cut it down and try it on, if the bust does end up too small, I'm probably just going to put like a long, narrow gusset in. I didn't really want to have to do gussets. That's part of why I picked this pattern, because it doesn't have gussets. It is a simplified one. But I would rather, right now, I'm at the point where I want to make this pattern work for me rather than scrapping it and starting over with a different pattern. Even though many people have had high praise for the truly Victorian Edwardian S-bend corset, I want to stick with this and see what I can do with it. So I'm going to finish taking my boning out, and then I'm going to just use my seam ripper and take this apart. And then I'm going to cut it down. So we're going to do that. All right, I have taken the mock-up apart. I removed all of the seams except my center front one, because since this seam was not going to change, I did not bother to unpick it. But all I'm going to do now is just trim down all of my pieces. If you are wondering why I have chosen to take the corset apart and recut it in a smaller size rather than just sew with a wider seam allowance, it is because of twist and all of the curves in the pieces. If I had just sewn with a wider seam allowance, I would get really, really bad twisting and diagonal stress lines in the corset mock-up, which would not help me tell if the smaller size would work at all. So yes, it takes longer, but it is a much smarter and better decision to take it apart, cut it down properly to the smaller size, and then resew it. So that's why I have done this. Alright, so going down 2 sizes did the trick. This looks really good. I'm happy with how it fits. I'm loving this line right here. That is awesome. So it feels good. I might not have the lacing perfectly even, but whatever. But yeah, I like how this feels and it looks, and I feel like I'm getting a fairly straight front here. Yeah. I think overall, I am happy with how this looks, having gone down in size. All right, so I don't think I'm going to make any changes. I think one thing I am going to do is I'm not going to cut down the top, because in the pattern there is 5/8 of an inch seam allowance along here that is then cut off, and then the top is bound. And because this is like right to the point with me, I think I'm not going to cut it down lower. I want it to still support a little bit because, yeah, there's a lot of me there. So I want to make sure I still have some support. But yeah, this is way better than the first mock-up I did, which, yeah, it was big enough to lace fully shut with no reduction at all. Honestly, I don't even have a measuring tape at hand, so I don't know how much reduction I'm getting at the moment, but honestly, this does not feel really tight. It feels comfortable, so it does not feel as tight as around the waist as some of my other earlier Victorian corsets do. So, all right, this is much more successful than my cheater chemise. All right, so next step is to cut out the final corset in the coutil. So yeah, it's late, it's 11 o'clock, so that'll be tomorrow's project.